Welcome to another episode of Greetings and Salutations. This is Wayne O'Connor from WayneO'Connor.com. May Jesus Christ richly bless you and keep you.
You are your Father's Son. You are your Father's Son in each and every way. You are His eternal paragon each and every day. All honor and glory to you, O Jesus, Yahweh's Son. Yes, Jesus, you are your Father's Son.
Hello, my name is Wayne O'Connor from WayneO'Connor.com and Dreamsinger Productions. My blog entry today, August 20th, 2017, at WayneO'Connor.com blog, is about Organic House Church Conference with John Zens. I will include a contact list at the end of the article, as well as the YouTube link for the mini-conference, which was held outside of Pure and Simple Cafe in Amory, Wisconsin. This article will be posted in my blog, WayneO'Connor.com, and on Facebook. John Zens is a well-known expert on house church and other general Christian issues. John is also the editor of the Searching Together journal. I have known him since at least 1990. While I visit traditional churches, and again, my name is Wayne O'Connor, I have been part of the home fellowship movement for about 20 years, maybe even 30. I am more of a writer than a speaker, but I can do both. Many years ago, John asked me to write an article for his journal, Searching Together, and as a part of that, I received a free copy of said journal whenever it was published. In addition to getting his journal, John often sends me copies of his newest books. Recently, John sent me a copy of his newest book, Jesus is Family. I was very moved by it and shared it with my fellowship that meets in my fellowship room in Glidden, Wisconsin. Ken is the other leader there. He owns the building and has an office in the basement. We are good friends, so even though Ken and his wife and their daughter and her husband, Brent, have their own houses outside of town, we spend a lot of time together fellowshipping and helping each other with things. We don't live together, but we spend a great deal of time together. When I told them I had known the author of Jesus' Family for many years, they wanted to meet him. I contacted John to see if he would get together for some Q&A. John was thrilled. It took a few weeks to get something together that met with our schedules. John suggested that we meet at Pure and Simple Food Store and Cafe. And that also, in addition to having the dry goods store and the cafe, has a petting zoo, and the children loved the petting zoo. Please find a link in my article for viewing Pure and Simple Foods. But in the audio, of course, you're just going to hear about it. We talked as a group for about an hour and a half or so over soup and sandwiches and traded testimonies. And by the way, the food there, if you get a chance to stop at Amory, it's great. It's a little pricey, but it is worth it, let me tell you. Great stuff. So we talked and we traded testimonies for about an hour. And I wasn't really going to say much except that my name is Wayne O'Connor, and sometimes I attend traditional church. But John and Dottie, since Dottie is John's lovely wife, they had known me in other home fellowships. They wanted me to spend more time on my testimony, and so I probably talked for about 20 minutes just on my testimony, but I'm not going to include that information here. After we had eaten, we ended the socializing section of our mini-conference. Mothers and the grandmothers, they all headed off with the children to the petting zoo that's outside of the dry goods store. And John and Ken and Brent and myself, we headed over to a little picnic table rest area that's outside of the Pure and Simple building. And John set up his audio equipment, and then we had our question and answer period. And John recorded it, as he often does. It ended up being such a good discussion time that we decided to make an audio of it. Now, despite the zooming of autos and trucks on the highway and the crunch of the visitors' tires on the gravel as they came in to visit the dry goods store or cafe, like I said, it ended up being a very good mini-conference. John Zens has been quoted in many journals and books concerning both house churches and general Christian issues. I have been part of a fellowship with Brent and Ken for about 5 years. During the first couple of years, we met mostly in Ken's house, and since May, we've been meeting where I reside. We discussed many topics during the Q&A session, including what do you do for children in a home fellowship? The importance of relationships in home fellowships. What do you do about couples who live together but do not have an official marriage license? Home fellowships / cell groups and traditional fellowships. What is the difference? Known problems with specialty doctrines and traditional church mashing in home fellowships. The difference between spiritual elders and natural elders. How Jesus uses child rearing and relationship issues to teach lessons on home fellowship. Anyway, here's the audio. It's about an hour long. My first question, I've known you for a number of years. Has it been 12 years, 15 years, 20?
Oh, it'd have to be close to, it was around 90.
Around 90.
Yeah.
But anyway, during that time, I know that you were, the Lord had given you insight. You were already talking about house churches.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the time that, I've been gone out of your life where, we just met each other periodically on Facebook or whatever, what's the new burning revelation that the Lord has given you concerning home fellowship?
The revelation probably wouldn't. House church would be like a spin-off of it, not the actual revelation itself. But I guess to me the key revelation would be that is a whole new way of looking at the believing life. That from the moment of our coming to the Lord, we're in a body, and so in other words, we've made a cut, we've snipped what God has joined together. So when a person believes in Christ, and perhaps at least in the early church, they were more than likely baptized the same day they believed, then they started functioning in the body. But we don't have that now. People, it's all individualized. You have an altar call or whatever, but it's you getting saved. But there's nothing really about you being saved into a body, and that you are then to function in that body. That part is basically missing.
Right. Your last book then was Jesus is Family.
Right. Right.
And I'm sure that's part, of this new radiation or shading on this important point that the Lord's told you about home fellowship.
So you look at most gospel tracts and they'll tell you you're a sinner and you need Jesus, and you maybe have a prayer at the end. And then maybe in little type it'll say, now that you've believed, you need to find a local church to go to and read your Bible every day and pray. But there's nothing in that about the fact that you're saved into something. You're saved to function. That's just totally unheard of. I certainly never heard of it when I became a believer. I went into a local church, but obviously I wasn't functioning. I was just going to a building and going through whatever they told me to do. So I think it has to be a revelation of the fact that, hey, if we're in Christ, we're also in His body. And obviously many people now would be technically in His body, but they're not functioning. So there's a gap, and so it's sad. That's obviously a burden that I carry, is to see people begin to function in the body in a non-hierarchical way, in a organic way, where there's freedom. And so it just seems like our whole idea of the Christian life has become essentially individualistic. It's just me and Jesus, and and obviously we have Christian friends or whatever, but it isn't. There's no idea that we're in this together. And we're in this for the long haul, and there's 58 one another's, and so we're supposed to, be encouraging one another, caring for each other, and praying for each other, and that That's there. And to put it bluntly, there should be more community. People should be more closer to each other so that they can be in each other's lives and not just come to a meeting once a week, and then go their separate ways. But in our culture right now, that's so hard to pull that off. Not that we can pull it off, but the Lord making it happen. I mean, people are so spread out, and there's so much work commitment and this and that and the other, and it's just hard for people to really spend time with each other outside a meeting on Sunday or Saturday or whatever. And so that's the thing I see, is that even among those who are outside the institution, they still struggle with community. They may be happy that they can drive 45 minutes and be in a meeting where there's some freedom, but it's not, you know what I mean? It's not totally face to face. It may be the best, then that's great. That's what they've got, great. But the point is, ideally, it would be better if we were closer to each other and able to actually, function with each other in a living way.
One of the reasons, John, that I was excited to share your newest book about Jesus is family with Ken is that one of the recent insights that he's been getting is that the Lord uses your own natural family to give you insight about the spiritual family within the home fellowship.
Right.
And I just wondered if Ken could share a little bit of that with you.
It's interesting. I was thinking about that. One of the things that the Lord, and we talked about this when I talked about Bruce and his talking about Matthew 7:29, about I never knew you.
Right.
Is this patterning off of our family relationships? We are in a husband-wife relationship with Christ. He is our husband, we're his bride. Mm-hmm. And then we have the father-child relationship and God the Father and that. So for us, to me that's a very intimate relationship, right? Intimate, and particularly with Christ. With Jesus, if he's your husband and you have a marriage that works and all that, you can look at that and say, well, what is it that works about a marriage? Well, first of all, if you look at a happily married couple, they'll touch each other probably 15 times an hour or whatever the statistic is, but they want contact. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that when you're in a husband-wife relationship, you know every little detail about each other. Not just, hey, that my wife, whatever, mm-hmm. but she likes this kind of ice cream, she likes this, she doesn't like this. The things that go back and forth. That's intimacy, mm-hmm. okay? It's knowing each other at that level, and because you want to, because you have the desire. So, for us, because I explained we lived in this multi-generational farm home that we were going to do, we went through some very difficult times with our daughter and son-in-law when we first all started living together, because we'd never done it.
Right.
And to the point I have to share, and Brent would be here, but Brent and I are in the backyard doing the guy thing, chest to chest, yelling at each other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, what was funny about it is after that, they went off into the barn, and I'm just like, Lord, I'm ranting and raving, and the Lord was so clear. He's like, I want you to go down there to that barn. I want you to hold that boy's hands, and I want you to apologize to him. I'm like, what? I want you to go down there, hold that boy's hands, and apologize to him. So I go down to the barn. He's standing there. I said, come here. He's like, what? I said, give me your hand. He's like, what? I said, give me your hands. I'm holding his hands, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, listen, I'm really sorry. God wants us, But it took the masculinity away. It took all that away. We're sitting there holding hands, and we're talking to each other, and all of a sudden, boom, a breakthrough, right? Mm-hmm. Brent, we were just talking about, when we all started living together, some of the struggles. And then as the grandchildren came, right? Where are those boundaries of parenting and grandparenting?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's one thing when, we live across the road from each other right now, so they have their space and we have our space. But when you share a space, I'm telling you, that line can get very blurry. Yep. Because, especially if you've got a new baby and you got mom who needs help, all of a sudden dad's attention's there, and then the other child, well, Granny and Papa have it, right? And that's what it's there for. But then all of a sudden, those lines of discipline and all that. So you have to learn to talk to each other and say, first of all, you're the parents. We recognize your sovereignty in this, in all honesty. And then, how do you want us to go about this? Here's our recommendations. And then for them to accept be in a humble position of, we see you parenting this way. There's some ideas we have that maybe you don't realize how this is working. And being able to take that, right, without getting defensive. What God showed me in that relationship is that's how we treat, or we're supposed to treat, baby Christians. We were talking about this on the drive to meet with you. Is if we are supposed to be the core of a house church, and God sends a baby Christian along, that baby Christian needs a mom or a dad. Okay, they need the parent figure, and we've actually had this happen where a young woman has come in kind of only the way God can do it, through all kinds of strange circumstances. But my wife has become this person's friend, and kind of like a mother figure or a big sister figure. But this person who is kind of taking the lead on serving God and being there for her. If we had a young man come in, one of us, I'm sure God would appoint one of us. So how do we do that? So we've got this picture of family and intimacy, and then what? And this was a question that I wanted to ask you, because it came up today, and I think this is probably the toughest one. We worked at a factory, and there were a lot of young people there that are hungry for God, but they do not want the institutional church. Been there, tried it, they just saw the hypocrisy, there's nothing there. So that what they want is, they're looking for the authentic experience with God. Now at the time we were really learning a lot of this. So what if you're exposed in a situation where you have a young man that comes into your church and he's like, I love Jesus. But this young man is sharing a house with a young woman. They share a bed, but they're not married.
Mm-hmm.
The law church would come and say, you can't do that, it's a sin, you're going to burn in hell. The ultra grace church would be, oh, it's okay, God doesn't mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what we were thinking, and I'm interested in your thoughts, is that as you build a relationship with Jesus, you get a heart, and he says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Not because you have to, but if you love me. Back to that husband and wife thing. So if you help these people understand that if you want to grow in your relationship with Jesus, you have to acknowledge the things that are going on in your life and ask to for God to right all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily believe somebody's got to run off to the courthouse and get a piece of paper, because for hundreds of years when this country started,
right,
we didn't do that. But you did make a commitment in front of witnesses and God.
Right.
And that's how marriage was gone. So if you were in that situation where somebody came into your home fellowship, what are your thoughts?
Well, like you alluded to, I think the first thing would be is that you would start relationships. So in other words, that's the key. You can't, of course, anybody that comes in is probably going to have some baggage, whether it's real open, like that, unmarried situation live in, or if somebody struggled with gossip or something. I mean, whatever it is, there's baggage. So to me, the way you begin is to just love the person where they're at, and you just, it doesn't mean you approve of everything they're doing. And I think a good part of the time, most folks will know that you don't approve of what's going on, but they haven't ever heard you say it. And I think that's the way it should be, at least at the beginning. Yeah. So you just love them and be there for them, and I think that's the organic way, would just be to let the relationship lead to down the pike when the Lord is opening the door, to just, if they don't come up with it themselves and say, I've been thinking about my relationship with her, and I realize it just isn't right. We should be making that right. Well, then you didn't even have to say anything. But there still could come a point where you didn't need to say something if they weren't getting the point after a reasonable period of time and all that. So I would hope that the love and everything would cause them to bring it up and say, we need to fix this. But if a reasonable time down the pike, probably you will have to say something to them and just say, you ever thought about, what's going on there, and that is the Lord pleased with that? But so again, you're not attacking them, you're not preaching at them, you're just speaking to them out of the fact they already know you love them. You've already established that. And that's what happens, of course, when you approach people about, we'll call them moral issues, when there's no relationship. It's like a witch hunt, because then they just think, you're judging me and all that. So that's the way I look at it.
Brent and I's circumstance where you come, even if you're upset with each other, even if you don't agree, if you're willing to humble yourself, hold hands, if you will, and just love the person for who they are,
yep,
and allow God to be God.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, that was one of the things from Christ alone. Jesus being the head of the church. If you have two heads, you have a monster.
Yeah.
That profoundly stuck in my head, and I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. It's like finally, okay, this makes sense. This was part of the problem.
Right.
One of the questions, like when people find out you're doing house church, we get asked, is like, well, who does the preaching? It's like God.
Right.
It might be Wayne today. It might be one of the women.
Right.
That was the only person I had to overcome from a Baptist background. You take a look at the scriptures, and Paul says, a woman should sit there in quiet and ask her husband at home. She shouldn't teach or usurp authority over a man. And you take those scriptures, and boy, they like those scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, it's like, well, what is a woman's role? Now, here's love for you, okay? So you have a brother that knows that this is what you believe, and God moves on his heart. He takes the time to do the research and says, I'm just going to present this to you. You do with it what you will. And you read it, and you're like, if you truly are searching in your heart, you read it, and you're like, Jesus did think a little differently about women than what I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that Paul had a specific, if you had the backstory to it, it would have a much more direct meaning
Right.
than trying to take it.
And John writes about that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah? Okay, cool. So that was
Yeah,
one of the questions.
yeah. So I think that obviously when you boil things down, you discover that approaching things with life organically just sort of, you might say, provides a framework for so many questions that come up, because you're basically approaching it all the same. You're approaching it relationally, being there for people, and then just seeing what the Lord does as time goes on. And that's the problem with the institution, is it doesn't encourage relationships. It just encourages doing what you're supposed to do in the bulletin and all.
Like me.
Yeah, and all that. So, and the vision of the pastor. So you look at all different kinds of things. What do you do with the children? All these questions people ask me. I basically I try to reply out of life. In other words, what's a natural way to respond to that isn't institutional or hierarchical, but it's just a natural life way to look at it, and then that allows you not to come up with just one answer, but each circumstance could have a little different nuance, So in one, we know, obviously, in all these different house groups, the way they deal with children have nuances, and it depends on the domicile you're in. It depends on a lot of things,
I can't help but smile at that, because somebody asked me that question, what do you guys do with your kids? I said, well, we take the Lincoln Logs and we dump them on the floor right in the middle, and they build stuff while we're talking, and we just talk a little louder.
There you go. Yep. So, but it of course always amazes me that one of the first questions that pops, I would say it's maybe question number 3 that pops up in people's heads is that question, like, what do you do with the children? But you start talking about it, but if they were looking at it more organically and out of the life of Christ, it would put it in perspective, and you would begin to see, well, we're so used to separating the kids, maybe it would be good, to integrate them and make them more a part of it, rather than think of separating them as we traditionally have.
Let's take a look at this. If we if we will agree that life is a grand conspiracy, you either conspire with God or you conspire with Satan. Those are the two opposing forces. It seems to me that within our lives here in this country in particular, the opposing force is centered around separating parental rights, parental responsibilities, godly parental responsibilities in particular, from parents to an institution, whether it be the school, the state, or the church. The church will teach your children. The school will teach your children. The government will tell you what's right and what's wrong. When inherently we know, as godly parents, that it's like, wait a minute, I know we're being lied to. Who is the father of all lies? Wait a minute, I need to take responsibility for my children. I need to say, I got this wrong, guys. I'm sorry. Let's take a step back. Let me tell you about Jesus. I heard, we went to a Voice of the Martyrs seminar down in Wausau. And what I really loved about that is the guy was talking. He was talking about his father. He says, I didn't want to be, my dad was a missionary. I didn't want to be like him. He says, and he wanted to go these places, and I always thought we'd get killed. And I said, we'd get up to each checkpoint thinking that you were going to get shot. And the first thing my dad would do is he'd roll down the window and they'd say, where are your papers? And he'd say, have you ever heard about the greatest gift that's ever been given to man? And he said, I listened to my dad give the gospel to each one of these. And these men would cry and repent, and he would give them information, and they would let him drive home.
Right.
See, when we operate in the power of Christ, when we fully trust Him and say, thy will be done, Lord, if it is to die today, it is to die today. If it is to go to prison, it is to go to prison today. If it is to serve you, to give the gospel to this man today, it is today.
Yep.
The institutional church does not think like that at all.
No.
And that's why I admire, like, again, Voice of the Martyrs, because they're out there dealing with our brothers and sisters who are experiencing real Christianity.
Right.
You know the reason that God doesn't show up at the Baptist church? Because they don't believe that He's supposed to.
Right. Yeah. And they structure the service to pretty much make sure that nothing happens out of the ordinary.
Yeah, they willfully quench the spirit.
Right.
Now, do you know David Andrews? You're not.
I don't think so.
So this older gentleman, another mentor of mine, he was telling me about a Native American guy. I'm trying to remember his name. He's from the Bad River Res. He was over in Minneapolis. Oh, he spoke all over the place. He was in London. Big church had asked him to come speak, and he goes up to the front door, or the front row. He's sitting there, and the preacher's going on and on and on talking about this guy, and introduces him, and he doesn't get up. He introduces him again. He doesn't get up. And the pastor comes down and he says, is there something wrong? And the man looks at him and says, do you know where I can go get a good hamburger around here? And that's all he said. And the church broke out in tears and repentance and weeping because they didn't want God there.
Right.
Bruce Bennett tells a story about how God called him to go to a pretty stuffy institutional church. He said he went for the service, the morning service. He said nobody came up, nobody wanted to hear about all that stuff. He said, but the pastor there that had asked him to come in, and I think the pastor actually got fired over him coming in. He said that night it was open to the community. He says the church was packed with people who were hungry for God. They're hungry for God, not pomp and circumstance.
Right. Yep.
So, this is my favorite subject.
You know, we were talking on the way up before we came to spend time with you, John, and ask you some questions about your book. We've been talking about children a lot and how that reflects, things that are happening within the body of Christ, if you get out of the institutional mindset. And one of the insights that Ken had received is that, there are certain responsibilities you have as a parent for taking care of a young baby. And we should see parallels to that, in, our one anothering and, having fellowships and that type of thing. And I was wondering if you could, share that, and then John could comment on it.
Sure. So you have a newborn child. What is it that you do to a newborn child? You feed it, you clean up after it, you nurture it, right? And you love on it. So when you get a new Christian coming in, and God assigns you to be the dad or the mom, what do you need to do? You need to feed it. You need to love on it. You need to nurture it, and you're going to have to clean up behind it and its messes.
Yep.
And if you accept that, then it's like, okay, it's not that hard. We know that this person, if this is what God's asked me to do, He eventually will He'll take care of it. You don't have to do anything.
Right.
That's the other thing. I figured out. I don't have to do it. I don't have to be worried because I know that, like, I started a new job, and it's so different than what I'd done before. And I was feeling a little bit of anxiety and stuff, hearing other people talk, and I was like, God, you put me here. So if you put me here, you're going to take care of me. And if you're going to take care of me, then I have no worries. So I'm just going to do this job like I'm doing it for you, which I am, and you're going to take care of the rest.
Right.
It takes all the pressure off.
Right. Yep.
I think in today's world, that is something that, quite honestly, young people, they don't understand. They feel all this pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you? When you were writing, is it Christ's family or Jesus' family?
Jesus' family.
Jesus' family. So as you're writing Jesus' family, and you're looking, and you start kind of coming up with the things about loving on each other and about really looking at the family dynamics. I mean, that's when I read that, it kind of pole vaulted me into some of the other stuff that I've been looking at. Where did that come from? Did you just praying and the Lord's like?
Well, number one, obviously, I've been reflecting all these things since 1977. So I mean, it was sort of I suppose it was a time. The time had come where the Lord had, that's dealt with me that's where I was at, and it came together. And so, as I said in the beginning of the book, I presented the essence of that book, in 2014 in Garden Grove, California, at a conference called, I called it Christ on Earth as Community. And I would say there are 17 chapters in the book. I would say at least 6 of those chapters were in what I presented in 2014. And so a lot of people, after I was done, they said, "Wow, that was quite a revelation," and they were real, encouraged with it. So a couple of people said, maybe you ought to put that into a book. So I expanded the outline maybe in beginning of 2016, and then I started writing it in December of 16, and finished it in March of this year. So I mean, it just sort of finally came out, and so that's what happened. But I mean, it's obviously, you know how it goes. Just like any trade, a person knows. Just like the guy that landed that airplane in New York, in the water. They asked me, what prepared you for that? And he said, well, my whole life as being a pilot prepared me for that moment of landing in the water. So that's, I guess everything in my life has led me to that point, and that's what it was ready to be said. And so obviously I've written a lot about the body of Christ, and this was sort of like a distillation of the essence of what was coming out. And so there you have it. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really was profound for me. To just living. I mean, Wayne is like we joke, brother from another mother. But he's part of our family. Okay?
Mm-hmm, right.
We're part of his.
Oh, you're all part of the same family.
Exactly. and when we looked at this and we're like, wait a minute, this really is the truth. This is what Jesus wants. He wants intimacy. He wants family. This is. And as we're looking, we find ourselves gathering. He prayed us in one night. Seriously. He's like, Lord, I really would like to gather tonight, and everybody's busy, but I really, really would like to gather tonight. Not knowing that. The next thing you know is we're driving back from an event. We have Tobias and Rebecca with us. Rebecca never gets sick. She launches in the back of the vehicle and coats everything. So So we get her cleaned up best we could. We call them up like, we're heading to Wayne's house. So that's where the washer and dryer is. Everything's coated. And the kids need a bath now.
Right.
And we get there and Wayne's like, I was praying that everybody would come over tonight. And this is something to discuss. I don't know if you've addressed any of this in your book, but when you get together, it's not always for the same thing. Like, there was one night we all ended up together, and somebody got out a hymnal. 2.5 hours later, we're still singing songs out of the hymnal.
Right.
Praising God.
Right.
That's all we did that night. There's sometimes we get together, and all of a sudden, a word, a message comes out, or, hey, I've been praying about this. This is what the Lord showed me. And it's interesting, too, because I'm the talker of the group. Wayne's the writer. Now, Wayne can talk, but typically Wayne will be like, I had this dream and I wrote about it. So then you read this dream and you're like, okay.
Or it's on audio.
Yeah.
Or it's on audio.
On audio.
Then you just listen to it.
But each one of us does things differently.
Right.
It's...
Well, I think that's the beauty of meeting under his guidance, is in that. So what you just said is absolutely true. I mean, over a period of a year, you would find all different kinds of nuances of getting together. It's just not meant to be the same. It's a variety, but it should always, of course, be about the Lord and be the center. But how that comes out is, there's no end to how that can come out.
I don't remember, you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember if you addressed this in the book or not, but it just seems to me that like 90% of the time that the Lord calls us together, it's not necessarily for a meal, but a meal happens. So there is something about eating together that is profoundly, maybe it increases the intimacy, because when our very first house church experience, one of the things, typically you would show up at the house around 10 o'clock in the morning. There'd be singing and praying, and a couple of the guys would take turns giving words, speaking about teaching or something. And then we would share a meal together. And that I always found was great because, again, I saw the intimacy develop. You're sitting on the porch, and yeah, some of the guys maybe talked about the ball game or whatever, but most of the time it was just talking about Christ. When we went to an institutional church, as soon as the service is over, the very first people to run out of the church are the men. They got to get home and watch the game on TV.
Right.
Whoever's playing, the Cardinals are playing, the Brewers are playing, wherever you're from,
right,
they got to get home and watch the game. They don't want to talk about God.
Right.
I'm just like, I don't want to talk about anything else.
Right.
I will share one funny story. We're at an institutional church. We have married couples thing. We start to gather on, what it was, Tuesday nights or something, and we talk. And so this young couple that are in the church, prominent, just really involved in the church, was talking about some troubles they were having because they weren't becoming intimate not as in physically, but they just weren't spending time together. And it came that she didn't like the same TV shows that he liked,
right? And
so he'd go off in his room and watch his TV shows, and she'd watch hers. And I was an idiot, so I raised my hand and I'm like, "Did you ever consider just getting rid of the TVs?" Oh, was I the villain? They jumped on me like I was like, I'm like, whoa. So when you do see an institutional church, some very simple things, they don't want to hear it.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Hi, buddy.
One of the things that's been a little bit different with this home fellowship, I've been a part of several in my life.
Right.
And it's like with most of the home fellowships, I might have something that was a little more traditional to bring, and I try to put it, in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever. But I never really had the freedom to function. A lot of times people would just talk over me and then start talking about whatever, and I would never be able to, finish the topic that I was on.
Right.
It was just pretty general. I get here, and I actually, for the most part, have the flexibility and the respect, where I can do that. But a lot of the times, I have a little bit of something to share. Have you thought about this? I might bring up. But because of, as Ken mentioned, I have dreams, about different things. Yep. Whether it's a teaching or whether, it's a song, I just, when I can, I share it with them. Or, I have like 21 books out, and there are like 4 or 5 that are kind of like, discipleship books or talking about different teachings, and a lot of times they're my sounding board. And when I can, I share it with them. But in this fellowship, for sure, it's like I'm not plugged in as a minister or
right.
the minister. And like you heard, Ken is the one who's very good at talking. He's a salesman, and I'm more the writer. But in the midst of all this, the Lord, in the last 4 or 5 years, just mostly, I think, because of different incidents, I had some health problems and things like that. He brought that all together, and he's like molding us, and he's showing us different things. And we even talk about some of the things that happened in home fellowship, which makes them more like a traditional church. And different issues that would come up, and it's like the Lord seems to be putting on our heart. You got to know what you're doing. You've got to do it better. What I have mentioned is I've seen this a lot in the home fellowships in the past. It seems like they get away and they get like really independent, and then they get this specialty doctrine, and that becomes the focus. And even if they're benefactors, they tend to try to control you, and get you plugged into their system. And it seems like the Lord has been showing me you've got to get beyond that. And you've got to have this relationship with me, and as a byproduct of that relationship, you model true Christianity. And I think that's really an interesting thing, for me to actually see it in action. He was kind of showing me this before, but now I see it in action.
Right.
I like, one of the things we can do is if I'm struggling with an issue, okay, I can say, guys, can we get together and pray about this? And I can talk about anything with my brothers,
right,
and we'll pray about it, and knowing that it's between us and God, and we're focused on that, and He'll help us through that. We really just, one of the things that God has shown us recently is that we have a certain responsibility to pray for one another. It's one thing to sit and pray for your family and all that stuff, but we have a responsibility. We're very aware that our battle is not against physical, but against powers and principalities. And we can tell from each other's behavior, because of this intimacy, when someone is struggling with something. And we don't need to get into big, flowery, all that stuff, but this person's struggling. And whether it's myself and my wife, the Lord even teach. Now, when you recognize, hey, I'm not behaving the way I should behave, you can pray and say, Lord, take this from me. But recently, God's not doing that. He is requiring one of the other members to pray for that person. And I believe that's to teach us that we need to be ready to pray for anybody like that. And if you see, Wayne is really good at he'll look at me and like, so you're experiencing something. And I'll be like, shut up, you're like looking right inside my brain right now,
Right.
I don't want to deal with that. But he'll tell me, like, yeah, he goes, well, let's pray about it. And my wife and I are and again, involving the women in the church. I'll pray for her, she'll pray for me. We'll pray together. It's just so important to recognize that the person sitting across from you, okay, I'll just use my wife and I as an example. I love her and she loves me. I know this. She loves Jesus and I love Jesus. I know this. So whenever our behavior is contrary to that, right, because that's our perfect state, if you will, when it's contrary to that, that means there's something acting on us from a spiritual perspective that's causing anxiety, causing upset, whatever it might be. And rather than looking at the person and being mad at them, I can't believe you're picking on me about this, or get defensive. If you can look past that and you can say, there is something I cannot see behind this person that is causing this to happen, and say, can I pray for you? And you pray for them and pray and ask God to remove them. Just as we've learned in the simplicity of, in Jesus' name, you leave my wife.
Right.
In Jesus' name, you leave my husband. When you start doing that, it takes you to a whole new level, because now you have your emotional intimacy and physical intimacy of being a man and wife. Now you have a spiritual intimacy that very few couples ever share. And that is a beautiful thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Back to what you were saying, I think when you mentioned the, what'd you call it, special doctrine or whatever, I think that's
Specialty
where,
doctrine.
Specialty doctrine. I think that's where I've seen so many fellowships do exactly what you said. And so to me, that shows, again, that if you're not focusing on Christ and Him alone, then these specialty things and other distractions will surely come along and just draw you away, because the evil one doesn't want us to focus on the Lord. So if he can get us off on some rabbit trail, then that's
he has religious spirits that are
right.
just waiting for that opportunity.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important for a group to maybe, however the Lord leads, to evaluate themselves periodically. Is this about Christ, or is this about politics, or whatever it is? We need to be upfront about that, because it's so easy to just imperceptibly slide away, from Him, and it becomes about gifts or whatever it is, and that's when a group does that, they're more than likely just gonna go down.
Chasing after a supernatural experience. Or
Right.
Mm-hmm. Is that the way you phrased it to you, or?
Yeah,
Something like that?
I was chasing after supernatural experiences, and chasing after prophets and prophetesses.
Mm-hmm.
I was focusing on that instead of focusing on my relationship with Him.
Right. So what happened to Sharon and Dottie? Oh, okay. Right.
Well, you could tell
Right.
from the moment they hugged it, that was it.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, it's.
By the way, one of the things I love is people are like, do you believe that you can pray and God will answer your prayers? It's like, God doesn't answer prayers. And you're like, you're exactly right. It says that unless you can go through all the scriptures, He's not going to hear you. But He listens to me because He loves me. Because I have this instrument. I'm not perfect. I still mess up. But He loves me because I love Him. One of the things I've been praying for is that my wife, because she's like, you have these men that are your friends. You have Wayne and you have Casey's there, but she longs for female companions.
Absolutely.
And so, again, the Lord brought along a young woman that was put in kind of that discipleship position for Sharon, who was, I don't think she was prepared for it, but it's been good for her because she's really had to push herself. But then you see it, and it's like, yeah, that's
Right.
One of the difficult things is we've kind of moved out of the area, and so it doesn't make it, as convenient for her to minister. But that's just something that the Lord will, either make a way, or He'll, find, someone else to come in that she can minister to, or just be a spiritual friend with.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes we let the physical boundaries. I just got off work. It's 6 o'clock. I'm tired. I don't want to drive an hour and have to go see somebody. But I don't see that in Scripture where it says, if you're tired, it's okay. You do the work of the Lord.
Right.
You were talking about being honest with each other. I can be very persuasive. I talk a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I am the exact person that a house church needs to be very wary of.
Yeah.
I can dominate.
Mm-hmm.
I can articulate. And I continue to remind my brothers and sisters, you have to be vigilant against me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be.
Right.
But it can happen so easily.
Oh, yeah.
It forces us to hold each other accountable. I know.
And that is one of the issues you can run into in the home church. Certain personality types tend to dominate it.
Yep.
And those that the Lord really wants to prepare, so that they can minister, so they can go out and work in the home fellowship, they end up getting squelched.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's pride, whether it's jealousy, or whether, this person who's the leader has an agenda.
Yep.
And a lot of times, even within the traditional church, there are exceptions, but those who are articulate, those who are very good at manipulating, those who are good at controlling and justifying it, they're the ones that seem to ascend to power.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the Lord has to remove them, or put somebody somewhere else, because what will happen often is you'll have a young person, maybe they learn to need more maturity, but you can see the Lord's working in their life, and giving them gifts, giving them training, but He wants them to do something, but that person who's right there in control, and we thought we got rid of that when we moved out of the traditional church, but it's still there often.
Right.
God is really looking for people who have a heart for Him, and as a byproduct of their relationship, they work with each other,
Yep.
and the gifts, you get the training, you get the experience, and then you go off and you just share with brothers, sisters, friends,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and the Lord opens up doors. And a lot of times, even with the home fellowship, we're getting out of that, what ends up happening sometimes is we spend so much time criticizing the traditional church, or so much time, trying to push our agendas, or trying to mold everybody to our little agenda, that we actually get in God's way.
Right. Yep. Yep.
That's why letting Christ be the head of the church, having a broad group, everybody's accountable to everybody, that can speak and say, I feel like the Lord would like me to. In other words, everybody has time. You don't put time constraints on. You don't put constraints on the experience. You just let it happen.
Right.
And everybody gets their turn to speak or say. The idea is, Wayne and I, we're a little bit older, a little bit further down the trail maybe than some of the younger ones. But the younger ones need to step up and
right.
And there have been times where the younger ones have had certain insight or wisdom, and as soon as we hear it, especially with Casey, we just know it, and we're just in awe sometimes, because the Lord wants to work through all of His children,
Right.
And we need to be open to the Lord ministering, through others that traditionally wouldn't seem to be the ones that are the most mature, the most learned on a subject.
Brent gets some very detailed dreams as well, and so he'll share them with the group, and we'll pray and look for them. My wife, who probably was the one that was most reserved and least willing to kind of step in and step up, not because she didn't have the ability, but just tradition,
Right.
from where she came from,
Yep.
told her that, hey,
Yep.
it has become, she's like, I don't know, it doesn't matter how you sound, honey, just pray what's on your heart, just let God flow through you and work and do it. She's become a mighty warrior.
Mm-hmm.
All of us.
Right.
If you want to be first, you got to be last, right?
Wayne knows a teensy bit about our, maybe a little more than teensy, about our Searching Together gathering that we have. We just had our 18th gathering in July in Elgin, Illinois. But anyway, we had 25 people this time from 9 states, and on our last session, it always seems when things go a little haywire, it always happens like out of the blue. You don't expect it. It just comes. Everything's fine, and then boom, So that's what happened in the last session. The whole time together was just so beautiful, so wonderful. But then this brother, who previously had said a number of things Thursday, Friday, and Saturday that were very good, but on Sunday he started going off on a rabbit trail, and I mean it was a serious deviation. And so I'm sitting there thinking, that he's of course he's going on and on, he doesn't stop. So I was sitting there praying, Lord, what do you want to do here and all that. And so it was just beautiful to see. Finally he took a breath, and so I just slipped in and said, brother, there's a lot of scriptures and other perspectives that you need to think about, because you're presenting this like this is the only option. I said, there are other ways of looking at this. And then I stopped. But then 4 people came in, and they corrected that brother. And one lady said, I feel like this is a demonic attack. Another brother said, now he was the first one that spoke. He said, brother, I feel like you're taking us down a road that can bring division. So that was the first thing. Then I said what I said. Then that lady, and several ladies and another man, they all spoke to him, and just very nicely but firmly, and just said, this isn't right. So he didn't see it right then. He was still defensive and all, but anyway, his wife told us after the conference was over that the Lord was working on his heart, so we haven't had an update on that, but hopefully he'll see that what he was doing was just wrong. But anyway, what he was doing was go with specialty doctrine, and it had no place in our meetings. But anyway, so
Now, as far as a specialty doctrine, you should have the freedom to hear it and then
Right.
the other,
Right.
judge.
yeah, right.
But like so many times, if that's on our heart, we think we're hearing from the Lord, and a lot of times it's just the devil and our own mind playing
Yep.
tricks on us, and we won't listen, and we go into this unteachable spirit mode.
Right. Well, so the beautiful thing to me was just to see the body self-correct,
Right.
and I didn't have to do it. I was minimal, but the others just stepped right in, and it was just beautiful.
How do you teach somebody how to do that in love? It's not easy.
No, but again, if there's a level of relationship there, that's what makes it savable. Now again, and coming to here are 25 people coming who basically see each other once a year. Maybe there are a lot of new people, but old people have been there several times. So with the brother that went haywire on Sunday, he had been there last year, so we had a little relationship with him. It wasn't totally out of the blue. But anyway, the point is, he was able to receive, at least hear, what these folks were saying to him without just yelling at him or getting really upset, even though he was defensive. But anyway, the point being, the body knew, everybody there knew everybody loved each other, so that was not a question. And so it's the key is, as Paul says, the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle, and the Lord doesn't need us to yell or anything. I mean, we can just share the truth firmly and lovingly, and he takes care of the rest. And because we know we can go blue in the face, but that's not going to change anybody. The Lord has to change the heart. There was a funny story that a lady who is a preacher's wife, he died, and she was, after his funeral and everything, she was going through all his sermon notes, which were boxes of them, and she found this one, and he basically typed his, obviously the days of typewriters, he typed them out. But anyway, in this one he had, out in the margin he had, argument weak, yell louder. So that was sort of told the truth, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But that illustrates a point. I think I brought that up a little bit earlier. It's a sad thing. I mean, God can work with that, and He does. But so many times, the ones who rise in position are those that are the most articulate and have the strongest ability to manipulate and control and get their agenda through.
Right.
And God has to work through that.
Right.
And that sounds like, if you have a bad argument, just yell louder. That's
Right.
typical.
Right.
That explains where a lot of people are at.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that the Lord has shown me, and I've used this as a word picture in a lot of my writings. But we can have wrinkles and rolls and gray hair, but if we haven't submitted to Jesus Christ throughout our life and let Him change us from the inside out to be more like Him, we just get a little bit older physically and we're babies. In one of my last books, in Kingdom Lessons 4, I was talking about there are natural elders and there are spiritual elders. And there are natural elders, they've got the wrinkles and the rolls and the gray hair, and they just yell and they demand their way, and they're like little babies, and they're not only bad examples, but they're giving forth bad doctrine.
Right.
And we have to come to the point where we just constantly submit to the Lord and ask Him questions, get brothers and sisters to pray for us, and let Him mold us and bring us up, because there are too many that have natural gifts, but they're not really spiritual elders.
Yep.
And the picture that the Lord gave me on that, it's kind of like if we have, we're going to go wash our car. We go through the drive-through, and let's say that we put in the premium amount, like $10 or whatever, that gives you everything. You go through that, and you get the whole enchilada. But in the natural, not in the natural, but in the spiritual sense, we have to allow the Lord to bring us through things all of our life to get us to different points so we're ready to minister. A lot of times it's like we go to Bible school or we do whatever, and we're not really mature, and we might have the ability to speak and manipulate and control and get things done, but we're really not God's man of the hour.
Right.
And what happens a lot is you have people that are like natural elders, and they haven't went through that. They haven't paid the premium price. They haven't let the Lord show them and teach them and experience things, and learn from Him. They may learn from man, or they may learn from their natural ability. Now they go through that drive-through and they want all these lights and everything to come on, and it just doesn't, because they're not spiritually mature. They haven't went to the spot where God has used them and worked with them, and they've functioned with the Lord, and they've experienced things with Him, and there's power in their wisdom, there's power in their prayer. And a lot of natural elders, that not only are they don't have that, but they're jealous and envious, and it can affect the whole body. It can be like a poison, it can be like a taint that comes in.
Yep. Of course, not surprisingly, the institutional church would tend to produce natural elders, and of course, lording it over God's flock is a horrible sin, and that's what tends to get produced. Right.
And that's the tendency there.
Right.
I mean, even within home fellowships, we have to be careful, because a lot of times we may leave the traditional church, but the traditional church still has roots in us.
Right.
And we tend to react that way. We try to mold things and control things. But we really have to let go and let go.
Right. And so along that line, then, the natural way, the spiritual way for people to be raised up would be through functioning as brothers and sisters in the body over a period of years, and letting the Lord form them. And so when Paul says, know those who labor among you, I mean, how can you know somebody if you haven't seen them function every day of the week, and in the good times and the bad times and all that? That's what shows what you really are. And so if you commend somebody to something based on 5 years of knowing them, that's powerful. But when you commend somebody who's a novice, or like you say, they could be 80, but if they haven't been through with the Lord, they're dangerous. And so it's again you look at it through life, and it puts it in a totally different perspective.
So I shouldn't feel like that somebody should respect me as an elder just because I think I'm one.
Right.
Yeah, if you're going to function in those things, the Lord makes a way.
Right.
And even as an elder, sometimes He can use a little child to rebuke you, or give you an attitude adjustment.
Right.
I was thinking of our mutual friend who is upset because I never gave him the respect as an elder.
Right.
Right.
Which one is that?
Right.
The one that's on with our group anymore?
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah. We're recording it.
Right.
Huh?
We're
recording it, so we won't.
Everything you say is going to take.
Yeah, everything that you've said, Brent, is on.
Well, he hasn't said much, so he's safe.
Well, I'm curious. I thought you had
That's a taser machine there.
No, I thought you had like a heart.
Oh, yeah.
Something like
Yeah, it's my
external battery.
Yeah, there you go. No, or oxygen. Right. Yep.
Actually, something we talked about like 20 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's the marriage thing. It goes back to if two people don't have a marriage certificate, a man-made marriage certificate, but are committed to God as to be with each other, that is fine. But I was trying to think, because you're like, well, come back to them over a period of time. If they haven't corrected, like, hey, you need to correct. Is that saying more like, hey, you need to get a piece of paper saying you're married? But if you're already committed to the Lord as as being a couple, and you just don't want to go through man-made marriage law, is that still?
Well, I can't give one answer for that, because again, there's different circumstances. What if they have been both married before, so you've got kids involved?
Yeah.
So in those kind of things, you can't just necessarily just say, I commit to you the rest of my life among these witnesses. I mean, there's legal things regarding children, so you can't just dismiss that. Other case, it might be two people that are never been married, have no kids, and all that, so that's different. So I'm not going to say specifically, but I just think the important thing is the commitment, and I believe it's good to do it with witnesses, and that there's some kind of accountability for their commitment to each other. Yeah. obviously millions of people get pieces of paper, but their marriages break up after 6 months. So what does that tell you? The paper doesn't accomplish anything.
The government should have no say in the marriage business.
Well, and I know people who've been together 14, 20, 40 years,
Yep.
and they've never got a piece of paper, went to the courthouse, paid
Right.
$15.
Right. But there is common law, though. Once you are with somebody for 7 years or whatever.
I know some states recognize it, some states
right.
don't.
So again, that's.
But I mean, like me, if they made a commitment to God to be man and wife, then, I mean,
Well, I have along that way, I got another thing that might help us understand or cause more. All right, so I told you that I adopted both my wife's daughters.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest one, his wife, I adopted, and when she was underage, until we changed her birth certificate and all that kind of stuff. And I left with my middle daughter. I had asked her at the time, I'd like to adopt. She goes, "No, you don't need to." And I just let her go. A couple years later, it really became. My wife came to me and said, "How do you feel?" I said, "I would have adopted her earlier on, but she said, I don't know. We should pray about this." Well, we both felt like, we really should do this. So I went to her and I said, "In Wisconsin, you can adopt an adult, by the way." I said, "I'm going to adopt you, and unless you do something to stop it, that's what I'm going to do." So I went through and we did the legal proceeding where she had to say, "Yes, I want this to be legal." At that point, she was, I'm trying to describe this. It's like the authority transferred from the biological father to myself, spiritual authority. And when I prayed for that young woman, the Lord came down because I was her dad. And I had the authority to break some things, and because of being her dad in a family, it was amazing. And we have a very special and close relationship. And I just observed her wishes, and it's like no big deal. She probably still would be struggling with things that today she's free from.
Mm-hmm.
She's beautiful young woman. Mm-hmm. So, was it the public, I want him to be my dad, or the piece of paper when the judge says I grant this to be true? I don't know. But I know that when she became my official daughter, and I prayed, the Lord blessed her.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of me, but because he says he'll curse generations and he'll bless generations.
Mm-hmm.
I just take him at his word, and I prayed for her because I love her so much. It was just amazing to see. You've seen it, how she's changed. So if that goes back to that question, for the married people, is it a piece of paper or is it the commitment? I can't answer that question, but if you're having spiritual trouble, if you are fighting all the time, if you're going to leave the window open, it's going to rain inside sometimes. So if you leave the spiritual window open, you expect the enemy to come by and spit in your window every now and then. Okay? And that's what you need to figure out. What is it you need to do to close that window open?
But I mean, does that go back to, don't be a stumbling block? Okay, let's say that we just made we're not doing names. Okay, me and wife, we made a commitment to God, ourselves, and from you guys. We're going to be committed to each other, husband and wife, but never got a piece of paper, man-made courthouse document. But then, say there's another brother that comes in, a baby Christian comes in, and they see us, but they're like, can't do that because we have a piece of paper. Would that be more like a stumbling block?
Well, again,
or am I going way off in left field?
Well, no, you're not. But I think again, you have to pray for those things case by case. We know a couple that went off by themselves and committed to they didn't know witnesses. They just committed to themselves and all that. But what happened like 2 years later is they were living in the midst in lower New York. They were living among some Amish people and Mennonite people, and because of them doing what they did, the community was very skeptical of them and was very standoffish and all that kind of stuff. So they decided to do the ceremony and get the paper. And so in this case, it was salutary, and it helped. So again, one time yes, another time no. It's just, but the bottom line is the paper is not the issue, but the paper can help if it'll minister to people. It's just like Paul had Timothy circumcised, but not Titus. And the reason was because with Titus, they were saying, you have to be circumcised. So Paul said, no way. But with Timothy, it was for ministry to the Jews. And so he said, go ahead and do it. So the same thing, one time no, one time yes. So it's a situation.
So it should be based on somebody comes to say they pray to the Lord and ask them, Lord, are they true? So that way you don't not be judgmental of them.
Mm-hmm. Right. In other words, I have no trouble accepting people who don't have a paper. The issue to me is their commitment to each other. However, if they, again, had previous marriages and there's children involved and they don't do the paper, it's possible, that things could get hairy. So, it's just, you just have to see the Lord in that,
I know some people just get married for insurance purposes.
Right.
If you don't, then there's no insurance.
Right.
Well, we see our government today trying to redefine or destroy what marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
How the government ever got involved, I find it amazing. They're like, well, we're about separation of church and state, which is not in our Constitution, but that's a different discussion. Yet they want to say you have to allow marriage between men and women and goats and boys and whatever it is they're coming, because it's going to get even worse, right? How is it that you have jurisdiction here and say that you can define what marriage is when you don't want anything to do with religion over here? And clearly marriage is a religious institution. It is not a government institution. Shake your head.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can't count on the government to do the right thing, so that's
and that's where God gives us guidance to pray for our
right.
And he put us here in this country.
Right.
He didn't put us in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And we have to just serve him wherever he puts us.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I was going to say back to your thing about natural elders, too, is that if a group watching one another 5 years down the pike or whatever wanted to recognize somebody as a deacon or an elder and having observed them for a period of time, the point would be is that the day that they happen to lay hands on them or whatever is not when they start eldering. They've already been eldering. They've already been deaconing. All you're doing is recognizing what's already there. And that's a key point, because some people have the idea that, now we're going to recognize elders. But the point is, what have they been doing before that? You don't just lay hands on somebody and they become an elder. That's ridiculous. They've already been, it's a title. If they've already been serving the flock, that's what you're recognizing what's already there.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with a lot of the different gifts. Whether your gifts teaching or administration, preaching or exhorting, or any of the gifts.
Right.
Or a door watcher.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that people want function and titles and function before they've been tested. The part that's missing is having been a brother or sister, being functioning among others and being recognized for what they've seen, not by what they hope for or what you think. Just look at all the people out there that are calling themselves apostles, and most of them never been in a body where they've just been a brother or sister and just functioned, and then the body recognizes that the Lord's setting them apart for something. That's the one big puzzle that's missing. And it's terrible, because you got people running around the country saying they're this and that, but who knows them?
Especially dominionists.
Right. Yep. Who knows them?
Whatever it is.
That's the first question I'd ask all these people is, who knows you? You know, who can you refer me to that's seen you function for years and knows you? That's the issue.
You are your Father's son. You are your Father's son in each and every way. You are his eternal paragon each and every day. All honor and glory to you, O Jesus, Yahweh's Son. Yes, Jesus, you are your Father's son.
Anyway, this is Wayne O'Connor from WayneO'Connor.com blog, wishing you a good day or a great evening, whatever the case may be. Thank you for listening. See you next time on the Greetings and Salutations radio show. And visit me at WayneO'Connor.com.